Okay, thank you all for coming to the this is the rare cancer block, but it's really trying to focus on things that are not actually usually covered in conferences like this. And so last year it was about some of the radioisotope stuff that we do, and a nutritionist talk, the importance of clinical trials. And this year I decided to bring back the nutritionist, who was the single most popular person. And man, will she give us some lessons on why we should eat better, and eating more parsley and avocados. But I heard Dr. Trapido. He is the dean of the School of Public Health, and I heard him give a similar talk at one of our cancer center retreats. And it is amazing how little I think we know about how climate not only affects our overall health, but the way we live, and the types of things that we are exposed to, and looking forward into the future, what we have to look forward to. So I asked him to come and give a similar talk, and just to kind of cover things that I just don't think I've ever heard a climate talk in a cancer conference type setting like ASCO or ASCO GI. And so I thought it was a really, really great topic, even though it may be just a tad on the scary side. But Ed Trapido, he's going to talk about climate.
Good morning, and thank you, Dr. Maluccio, for inviting me to speak and to putting up with I'm not ready yet to send you my presentation, which I seem to be an expert at now. So this is a little bit different than the clinical talks that you're going to hear, but it has direct relevance. And so some of this you may have seen in parts or similar things, but I'll try to keep you awake for the next 15 minutes, and then we'll see where we go from there. This is I don't have any conflict of interest slide. So many of you have probably seen images of this, and this is the distribution of cancers in Louisiana. The one on the left is incidence, the one on the right is mortality. And I don't know if you can read the specific sites, but let me say that almost all of them that are in the top 10 certainly are related to some environmental exposures. And when I'm talking about environment, because that can be a misleading term, I'm talking about a combination of climate, extreme weather events, as well as carcinogens that are in our air and in our water. This slide, and I realize there's a lot on here, and I don't know whether you can see it, but this slide looks at the impact of climate on health. And what struck me about this is that they don't include cancer. And there's probably been more of a focus on acute illnesses immediately after an extreme event than what are the longer term impacts. And we're still discovering that. So how does climate affect cancer risk? Well, it affects the air quality. We know that. We're all experiencing some levels of pollution, both outside the home and inside the home. Climate can have a devastating effect on pollutants. For example, I imagine you're not aware that during hurricanes, there are excess releases from factories of toxins, carcinogens. And they've been counted in Louisiana. We know that happens. And so it has a direct impact. It certainly has an impact on water pollution. Those of you who were here during Katrina know the impact it had on the water. Sun and heat exposure, obviously excess heat. Now, excess heat is an interesting one because there's really been much less concentration on extreme heat events and what that does. And imagine the woman who's supposed to go for a mammogram on the day that it's 98 degrees outside. And she's been scheduled for this for months. And she decides, it's just too hot. And I don't want to stand out and wait for a streetcar or a bus to get there today. Um, I don't want to go to the pharmacy to pick up my next round of medication. It's just too miserable. And for extreme events that last, extreme heat that lasts longer, it's even a greater problem. Food quality is another one. That one's more involved, but it changes the crop makeup. It changes the use of pesticides and the contamination by pesticides. Agricultural runoff is a problem in this state, as it is up and down the Mississippi. Okay. So what do we know from some of the pre-existing research? So being treated in an area where a hurricane disaster has been declared is associated with overall poorer survival. Um, when you're thinking about getting radiation therapy and you're delaying a treatment or you're delaying a chemotherapy round, it's going to impact survival. A decade after Hurricane Katrina, the survival of women with breast cancer was worse among those who experienced Katrina than those who had not been through it. And that's a decade after Katrina. Um, the global burden of lung cancer deaths attributable to fine particulate matter in the air has increased in recent decades. It's not a surprise given the extreme weather events, particularly heat. Um, gaps in radiation therapy. This one talks about head and neck cancer. Um, one of the things, I used to work with the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is a sister agency to the World Health Organization. They're the agency that's responsible for, they're the Atoms for Peace agency, but they also go around and look for nuclear weapons. So what they do is try to figure out, for example, putting in radiation therapy equipment in developing countries and training people to use it. One of the biggest problems with that is that there's an inconsistent supply of electricity in some of these areas. Well, you can't plan to deliver radiation therapy if you don't have a solid, constant source of electrical power and backup. So now we're talking about what happens in extreme weather events. The same thing happens. If the lights start to flicker, that's going to screw up the dose that people are going to get. And so there is a direct effect. And it's not just extreme heat. We don't suffer as much as some of the other states in terms of forest fires, which obviously you can imagine what have been increasing because you've been watching the news. But but that certainly is related to air pollution. We do get the impact of that air pollution even here. Hurricanes, you're all very familiar with, and what they do. Heat waves, I've mentioned. Floods. Floods are problems the same way in terms of exposure to contaminants in the water, and droughts. All of these are extreme weather events. And I have to be honest, I'm not saying climate change, because the time now is that we have to be a little bit cautious about how we refer to things. It's a tough time to be in public health, let me tell you. It's when we look at the health of the population, we're interested in all parts of the population. So things like, we can't say underserved anymore. We can't, there's a list of words we're not allowed to use. I won't go any more political than that. But it's a tough time to be in public health. What can be done? So how can clinicians prepare for this? What kind of plans do hospitals have for dealing with patients who are on therapy or who are ready to be screened? What kinds of, it's one thing if a facility is out for a week. It's a totally different thing when a region is out for multiple months. What happens to the patient? What happens to their treatment? What happens to their availability of chemotherapy or of other medications for comorbid conditions? Now, some hospital systems have done a good job and have plans in place. Others, and certainly more local offices, are not really that equipped to deal with it. And so it is something of a problem. But there need to be alternate treatment plans ahead of time made and discussed with patients, particularly if something is on the horizon. And so there needs to be backup. And refrigeration of pharmaceuticals, that's going to be a problem too. And so there has to be planning involved in anybody who deals with cancer patients, cancer early detection, as to what's going to happen when the next extreme event happens. And we know that they will happen. So, we're a couple of months from the beginning of hurricane season. So it's right around the corner. And so there's a fair amount of not very solid evidence about what happens with hurricanes, what happens with these events. I know because I've published some of it, and it's based more on anecdotal data than well thought out studies. So there really needs to be a concentration, or at least an effort, to look at, well, really, what happens? What kinds of plans are in place? How many facilities actually have a plan in place? What do the patients know about it? Yeah, they'll get a brochure, like we all get brochures, what to do in case a hurricane hits. That's not enough. So here are some of the bullets: exposure to disruption of cancer care, exposure to carcinogens, access to healthy food, certainly psychosocial stress. You can, I'm sure if I asked, I did this in one of the other rooms I recently spoke in. Actually, I was teaching in Cuernavaca, Mexico. I started in Spanish, but I didn't last very long in Spanish. Anyway, I said, how many people either have had themselves or have had someone in their family who has had cancer? I'm going to ask that now. Raise your hand if you're in that group. And just like in Cuernavaca, probably 90% of the people in this room have been through that. So psychosocial stress is enough when you're either a cancer patient or you're a friend or family member or provider. Now add on top of it this mess of extreme climate events. So these are exposures along the Mississippi. These are emissions. These are not made up. These are places along the river where there are excess emissions. So when we, kind of moving from climate for a moment to environmental exposures, I want to tell you, first of all, that it's not just the area between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. That may be termed Cancer Alley, or I tend to refer to it as the industrial corridor, but it's not limited there. That's gotten a lot of attention. But we've got a problem. The good news is these industries employ people. The bad news is that there are many exposures that could be lessened or minimized or eliminated. All of these cancers, you got bladder, testicular, esophageal, kidney, pancreatic, breast, and prostate. All of those are associated with environmental exposures. Now we know that cancer is a combination of genes and environment. And we're learning more about the genetic piece of it. And the trick is, how can we make a difference in the environmental exposures without hurting the economy and without maintaining a healthier environment. You know, there's a school right outside the Denka plant, and you've all read about Denka and chloroprene and the EPA's estimates of risk. There was a school right outside, and these kids were being exposed, and they were already developing excess asthma, excess allergies, more days lost from school. And with, so it's not just people at the age when cancer tends to be diagnosed more frequently, it's long-term exposure. And the kids are playing outside, or the kids, I mean, it's just a problem. It's a huge problem. There's been a change about zoning that has resulted from this, so the kids are not getting quite the same exposure. But it's something that is not, we can't really ignore it and expect the population of Louisiana to be healthy. And this is not against the Denka plant. It's just that this is an example of a problem. Angiosarcoma, mesothelioma, cholangiocarcinoma, nasopharyngeal cancer, soft tissue sarcomas, they're also all associated with environmental exposures. And very common ones are formaldehyde, ethylene oxide, and chloroprene. We've got some maps here. You saw some earlier today. So these are maps that have looked at exposures. This one is primarily focused in the industrial corridor, and you can see that the arsenic is, we try to see, well, which cancers are associated with which environmental exposures. And clearly you see arsenic, chromium, I didn't read that myself, but it's on right here. Nickel, there we go. Cadmium, mercury less so. Now the last slide is not looking at cancer risk. The last slide is looking at particulate matter of 2.5 millimeters. And so you can see that particulate matter is a problem throughout the state. It is not confined to the industrial corridor. This is ethylene oxide, and look what it's doing to rates in the industrial corridor. This one is not looking at cancer rates. This is groundwater arsenic levels, and arsenic is a class 1 carcinogen. This is, I can read it here, where water quality exceeds the threshold for humans. So it's up and down the Mississippi in the northern part of the Midwest, all the way down to us, and then along the East Coast. Now, one of the problems with water contamination, besides the ones we've all heard about as we've grown up, is that the disinfection byproducts, which are used particularly for agricultural runoff, but also for household disinfection, there are several byproducts that are carcinogens. And so we've got a problem, including in Louisiana, with these disinfection byproducts. Bladder cancer, endocrine-related cancer are associated with this trihalomethane exposure. This has been only studied a little bit. It's of concern because people are not thinking in terms of exposure through, we're concerned with the water tastes funny or it looks funny. That's about the way most, and then of course, what do? We buy water in plastic bottles. And that's another issue, but I won't do that one. There are 740 sites in the state that both house toxic chemicals and are at risk for extreme weather. about a quarter of the state's population live within a 1 mile facility of factories that are emitting foul things. Now, I mentioned temperature. I didn't talk about sea level rise. That one is another entire issue in climate, but there have not been particularly useful studies that have come out of that research. But it's not, in fairness, it's not an easy area to get funded. And it's going to be harder to do that. So this is, on the left, you see Hurricane Ida oil spills. Not as bad as Katrina and Rita, but still oil spills. After Hurricane Ida, there were 20 to 30 pollution events, including 171 oil spills, 1.6 million pounds of pollutants. So, everybody deals with the acute effects of a hurricane, certainly safety and saving lives. But it does have an impact on what we breathe, what we drink, what's in the soil, and that doesn't go away so quickly. All of these facilities are at risk of flooding. Flooding releases additional chemicals, and that's a problem because many of them have carcinogens within the mixture they have. And this slide tries to show the relationship between climate and air pollution. And basically what it says is extreme climate increases air pollution. That further changes the environment and makes it perhaps more likely to have another event. Katrina caused 11 million gallons of oil to spill. Harvey, power outages and unrefrigerated chemicals. You get the picture. This is a problem. It's more of a problem in regions where there are lots of factories, and it's something that we don't hear too much about on the news. So this one looks at the impact of climate along the entire cancer control continuum. And basically, at every stage of the development of cancer and many stages which we're still learning about post-diagnosis in terms of recurrence, survival, and quality of life, climate has an impact. And this is an area that I'm kind of at the tail end of my career, so I can go out and do things that I probably will get in trouble for as a state employee. But, if you're in public health and you're dedicated to improving the lives of people, it's kind of like, as all of you are as clinicians, if you're clinicians or working in labs, sometimes you just got to take that step and say, I got to stand up for what I believe in. Otherwise, I'm not doing a good job. And I think that ends my presentation.
Since we have a have to at least, oh, sorry. Yeah. So I won't add the thing about LSU. So the things that we can do in our small little way. So I watched Dark Waters on the Netflix documentary, and that is about the stuff that's seeping into our soil and our groundwater, which is also happening here, and whether or not does initiatives where if we were to have endless gobs of money that is not going to stop people from polluting, to buy people water filters or air purifiers in their house, will that even make a dent? Please say yes. A dent in the at least some proactive ways that we can try to lessen the burden for people and patients that live in this state? And if so, then I guess that would be my goal for next year.
That's a great goal. And I will tell you that, we spend a lot of time in our indoor environment. And so having clean air in your home with a good filter and having clean water does make a difference. And it's not going to solve everything because we're not there 100% of the time, but it certainly helps. The other thing I will tell you is in terms of what people can do, I had the good fortune last week of going to Capitol Hill, and I met with Senator Cassidy's office, Troy Carter's office, and one of the things, and as a state employee, I can educate, I can't advocate. But one of the things that came back, particularly from the staff, was they need stories about what's actually happening on the ground level, and those are meaningful. And so, regardless of an issue, if you express an opinion about not an opinion, if you can relate a story of what's happened with one cancer patient, or you can relate how it's impacted a school, or you can relate anything that you've experienced, those do have meaning. And that's what the staff really wanted to hear. And so, again, we can't do everything, but we can make changes in our local area, in our local community, and get involved with local organizations. And we'll get through this. And thank you all for listening.
Okay, does anyone else have questions for Dr. Trapido?
Fluoride. Okay.
Yeah, fluoride in the water.
All right. Growing up without fluoridated water, I spent many times my career in money at the dentist's office. The evidence, overfluoridation can be a problem, but as long as it's at the standard levels, it has a huge impact, particularly on childhood tooth decay and loss of teeth. And we all know that when you're a cancer patient and you can't eat, you have so many other problems going on, the last thing you need is to be dealing with other oral problems. And so I have been and remain a proponent of fluoridation. The treatments that people get in the dentist's office are helpful if the water's unfluoridated, but not everybody can afford that.
So you talked about pesticides. I'm curious if there's any specific data on fungicides and specific types of cancers.
I don't know that answer, but I'm happy to look it up for you and speak to some people who may know that answer.
And I have another question.
Okay.
Or two. So you talked about BPA with breast cancer, and you talked about pesticides with testicular or prostate cancer, but I think that's a factor for them both, is it not?
Yes, it is. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Okay, thank you very much.